Why would Hegel, if he were alive today, sit and read the ancient Greek dramatist Sophocles while binge-watching The Sopranos? Well, there's a lot of philosophy in The Sopranos, and of course the story of the New Jersey mobster takes psychology as its central theme. But I think the focus of the show, which ran for 6 seasons between 1999 and 2007, is Tony Soprano's torn identity, his existential questioning about who he really is, and the ever-looming threat of nihilism. Not least because of James Gandolfini's performance, the questions about individual identity and our relationship to the state in the 21st century are, I think, what makes the series so enduring. It's all about the question of who a person really is, their search for some stable meaning in life, and the antagonism between how someone is expected to act and how someone wants to act. Tony is a mob boss, a family man, a businessman, an Italian, an American, a Catholic, and on top of this is torn between being a good and a bad person. Many of Tony's problems come from these identities coming into conflict, causing him existential crises. If he were alive today, I'm going to say that The Sopranos would be Hegel's favourite show. He'd binge it over and over. Unfortunately for Hegel, he lived around the turn of the 19th century though. He witnessed the French Revolution and Napoleon's rise and defeat, but like Tony Soprano, he was searching for some kind of meaning in life. He was searching for direction. And he realised that for there to be meaning in life, there had to be meaning in history. Was it God that had some grand plan? Was there a God? If not, what was moving us forward, if anything? Hegel's answer to these questions began quite simply. He said that the history of the world is none other than the progress of the consciousness of freedom. He thought that freedom evolves over time, but the rest of his philosophy and how he comes to that conclusion is notoriously complex. Hegel looks at European history, from the Greek city-states to the rise of Christianity to the Reformation, the French Revolution, and the modern liberal Prussian state that he lived in, and he concludes that political and social systems develop to produce an increasing amount of individual and societal freedom. He thinks that the way we understand the world, the way we come together, evolves over time. This was decades before Darwin was writing. When he looks at conflict and argument, he sees two competing ideas battling each other. The better way of living wins. Those who are more free, more self-aware and better motivated, fitter, wiser, etc. They are going to win. He sees history as a kind of mathematical progression through which a universal harmony of interests is developed. He sees this happening on a personal and societal level, literal and abstract as well. For Hegel, history progresses dialectically, through the development of theses, antitheses, and syntheses. A thesis is just a way of doing something, whether it's a chess technique, a form of government, or a way of fighting a war, or building a computer. A thesis always comes up against an opposing technique or mentality, an antithesis. Hegel says that the best parts of the thesis will subsume the best parts of the antithesis, and a synthesis of the two will emerge. The dialectic process will continue until the best way of doing something develops. This is Hegel's philosophy of science and logic and history, and it's all driven by what he calls Geist. Geist is that ultimate freedom, that end goal, that progression that we're moving towards. One of Hegel's most famous concepts is the negation of the negation, and it's difficult to wrap your head around. But say I have a view of something, and you have a competing view. In a discussion, your view, if it's right, it takes something away from my view, my understanding. It negates something in me. I'm potentially wrong about it, and I seek to make sure that I'm right, to negate that negation, to get rid of it, to confirm that I'm doing something the right way. But Hegel says that there's usually some truth in both views, and so if we're rational, which we are, according to him, because it's rationality that drives history, the views synthesize, and we move forward. It's a kind of negotiation, and imagine this happening across an entire society. Negations are constantly being worked out and negated. A scientist might have a hypothesis, someone disagrees, ideas get synthesized, and we move to have a more complete understanding of the world. So what's this got to do with Tony Soprano? The show centres around Tony's visits to therapy in an attempt to treat his panic attacks. Like a Greek chorus or a Shakespearean soliloquy, this plot device allows us to get inside the character's head, to hear his thoughts out loud. What we see is a head of conflicting identities, primarily torn between being a good family man and a ruthless and effective mob boss. Like Hegel's dialectic, this is a thesis and an antithesis that can't coexist. They are a contradiction within Tony's head. Most episodes centre around themes that question what it is to be in the mob, or to be a husband, or to be a family, or an Italian, or a Catholic, and how they all come into conflict. I think the episode called College in Season 1 illustrates all of this well. Tony and his daughter Meadow are on a trip looking around colleges for a few days. The episode starts with Meadow asking Tony whether he's in the mafia. At first, Tony is offended, but eventually acknowledges that some of his business activity is illegal. Meadow is trying to understand her father's identity, and when he acknowledges it, a reconciliation about the truth is made. A synthesis of two opposing views about who Tony is in Meadow's head. Scenes like this one also highlight the question of identity in The Sopranos.
Tell you how proud I am of you. A real student at Casa Soprano. And she looks like one of the models right out of Italian Vogue.
Italian. Thank you.
The episode is about different identities being incompatible with each other. There is a dialectical process of trying to either have each other coexist or to get the other to recognise the way you live and the reasons for it. Tony explains why there weren't many options for the Italian people to justify why he does what he does. While Tony and Meadow are away, Carmela, Tony's wife, has dinner with the local priest. She too is torn between supporting Tony and her family and being a good Catholic. But this tension is increased further by Father Phil's conflict between his faith and abstinence and his desire for Carmela. There's even a scene where Father Phil gives Carmela a book about different religions, again competing ways of viewing the world. Meanwhile, on their trip, Tony sees an FBI informant who went into the witness protection program. Again, he is torn between looking after his daughter, who gets too drunk, and the codes of the mob. He eventually murders the informant. He could have had someone else do this, but he clearly enjoys it. After he kills him, he looks up and sees ducks flying. His first panic attack, back in episode 1, happened after a family of ducks that had been living in his pool migrated. In therapy, Dr. Malfi thinks that the ducks may have represented his own family leaving him. After this, he has to lie to Meadow about where he's been, and she gets offended that he's lying to her. Then, in the next scene, he sees this quote by Nathaniel Hawthorne in the university. It says, "No man can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which one may be true." So why would Hegel like all this so much? Hegel found the tension between family life, ethics and the state particularly important for the movements of history. He especially liked the story of Antigone by the ancient Greek dramatist Sophocles, who Tony has a lot in common with. In the play, written around 441 BC, brothers Eteocles and Polynices are meant to rule Thebes together, alternating their duties each year by decree of their father. After the first year, though, Eteocles refuses to step down, and Polynices goes to war with him and they kill each other in a duel. Their closest relative, Creon, then becomes king. He declares that Polynices must not be buried. He must be left to rot. He decides that the rule of law, peace, is more important than any war or insurrection, and Polynices brought misery. Antigone is Polynices and Eteocles' sister. For the Greeks, not burying someone means they won't get into the afterlife, so this decree by the new king is traumatizing for her. She literally can't live with it. She attempts to bury her brother, only to be caught, and Creon the king asks if she thinks she's above the law. Hegel points out that these are two conflicting positions, one of the rule of law, of civil society, what's right for the community, and one of familial values, and how the family is, when it comes down to it, more important to someone than the rest of the community. Like the Sopranos, Antigone is a tragedy about what happens when values contradict each other, and how they have to work out these contradictions in some way, usually to the detriment of the characters. Antigone refuses to refrain from burying her brother. Creon refuses to let Polynices be buried. Antigone ends up being imprisoned and hangs herself. The point of Antigone is that to do the right thing, the moral and ethical thing, for her, she has to be a criminal. Hegelianism has been hugely influential in philosophy, most notably through Marx's belief that the final synthesis of history would be communism, and Hegel's philosophy is still argued over today, whilst coming under scrutiny, particularly for its view of history as being liberal, broadly linear, and Eurocentric. One thing we've learnt since Hegel is that history isn't quite as rational as he thought. For me, reading Hegel helps to look at things differently, to try to take the opposing view, see what it has that I don't, and to think about what a balanced synthesis might look like, as well as taking a long view of history and shifting identity. Who knows though whether Tony Soprano's story is a tragedy like Antigone's, or ended optimistically like Hegel would probably have hoped. If you want to support Then and Now, then there's a few ways you can help. You can, of course, subscribe, like and share below, and importantly, click that bell to be notified of new videos. You can also support me on Patreon, where you'll get access to scripts and audio early, I answer questions, and can put your name in the credits for as little as $1 per month, thanks to my existing Patreon supporters. Also, if you're thinking of buying something on this topic, if you do so through my Amazon link below in the description, I'll receive a small commission at no extra cost to you, all of which helps the channel out massively. Thanks for watching and see you next week.